It was one of those perfect summer days, with a flawless blue sky and a gentle breeze dancing over the fields. Helena boarded the train, adjusting her suitcase by her seat while observing the people around her. Each person seemed to carry a story, but it was the gaze that met hers that made her hold her breath. A young man, dark-haired and calm in his stance, approached with a slight smile. Marcos's gaze was intense, as if he recognized something in her he had been searching for all along. They settled into nearby seats, and as if by some carefully crafted twist of fate, their conversation began with an easy lightness, blossoming into an immediate connection within minutes. Every word they exchanged felt like unveiling a missing piece of a puzzle Helena hadn't realized was incomplete. With laughter and shared confidences, the French countryside outside seemed to fade, leaving only the intimate space of the train car, where every moment became precious. Helena felt at ease in a way she hadn't experienced in a long time. She let herself get lost in the stories Marcos told, finding herself fascinated by every detail, every nuance. It was as if he was an extension of summer itself, with all the vitality and spontaneity the season inspired. There was something magnetic about him, something that made her want to prolong every second of the journey, knowing it would eventually end. As the train traveled along the tracks, time seemed to suspend itself. The golden light filling the train car bore witness to a first meeting that, deep down, Helena knew would leave its mark on her life. She wondered why she felt so close to someone she had only just met. Was it fate? She had never believed in coincidences, but this encounter made her rethink everything. Marcos's words were like a melody filling her heart, with a bittersweet mix of happiness and anticipation. Deep inside, a feeling of unease began to stir, something she couldn't quite explain. Perhaps it was the fear that the magic of the moment was only a fleeting dream, destined to dissolve. She knew the train would keep moving, just as their lives would, but within her, there was an urgent wish that time would stop, that the train would never reach its destination. There was something intensely romantic about the setting, something that awakened every dormant dream, every forgotten hope. They were just two strangers sitting side by side, but at that moment it was as if the entire world had shrunk down to that train car. For an instant, Helena allowed herself to wonder about possible futures that might never come to pass. And yet, she let herself dream, just for a moment, of a what-if that pulsed stubbornly in her mind. As the train approached its final stop, Helena felt a pang of sadness that even the breathtaking scenery couldn't soften. Saying goodbye to that moment seemed an impossible task, but she knew she had to. As the train began to slow, she clung to every detail, every fragment of time she had shared with Marcos, as if doing so could prolong the magic that still surrounded them. When they stepped off, their eyes met one last time, and without words, something was sealed between them. A silent promise that this was only the beginning of a story that fate had yet to write. The summer retreat was an explosion of colors and sensations, as if time itself had aligned to create a magical atmosphere. In the days that followed, Helena and Marcos became inseparable, exploring the winding trails, green hills, and hidden coves together. Every moment seemed tailor-made for them, as if the world around them simply paused whenever their eyes met. She followed him at every turn, and each place they visited seemed to take on a new beauty with him by her side. In Marcos, Helena found the lightness and intensity she had always unconsciously searched for. He was a mystery to be unraveled, a young man full of dreams and ambitions, but with a depth that made her feel safe. They shared secrets, desires they had never voiced to anyone else. On walks along the beach, under the golden sun that embraced them, they made silent promises of a love that felt limitless. Every laugh, every casual touch was a memory she cherished, fearing the inevitable end of that summer. There was something almost sacred in the way their eyes met, in the way they seemed to understand each other without words. What was meant to be a fleeting encounter had turned into a love Helena felt could last forever. Amid the warmth of summer and the surrounding beauty, she allowed herself to believe in a forever, even though she knew reality could be harsh and unyielding. But in that moment, the distance between them felt non-existent, and all that mattered was each other's presence. However, as summer progressed, a shadow began to form between them. Helena noticed a quiet concern in Marcos's gaze, as if something was pulling him away, something he didn't know how to share. She tried to ignore it, telling herself summer wasn't over yet, but the feeling that something was approaching was inescapable. He seemed distant, as if he was guarding a secret that could change everything. Finally, one evening as they watched the sun set over the ocean, he revealed what he had been holding back. In a few weeks, Marcos would be entering military service. It was a choice he had made long ago, a path that would demand more of him than any of his summer dreams could offer. Helena's heart tightened, as if the future she had imagined was shattering before her eyes. The promise of eternal love now seemed threatened by a distance she wasn't sure she could bear. The euphoria that had united them that summer transformed into a painful melancholy, a race against time. They continued to explore every inch of that enchanted place, trying to absorb each moment, each laugh, as if they could store them away for the days when they would be apart. But the truth was there, raw and unyielding, reminding them that Marcos's fate had already been decided. In those final days, each goodbye became harder, each touch more desperate. Helena knew that when summer ended, he would leave for an uncertain future, taking a piece of her heart with him. And though she wanted to fight it, she found herself more and more at the mercy of this overwhelming, dangerous love. Even without guarantees, she held on to the hope that somehow, in some way, their souls were destined to meet again. The last day of the retreat arrived with a quiet urgency, as if time, so generous until now, had decided to speed up. Helena and Marcos walked side by side, a heavy silence making each second even more precious. The days they'd spent together drifted through Helena's mind like a warm breeze she tried in vain to grasp. She knew that at the end of that day, he would leave, taking with him the memory of a love that, though new, already felt unforgettable. As they said goodbye, Helena memorized every detail, every line of Marcos's face, trying to capture it all in her memory. The train that would take him away waited at the platform, and she felt her heart grow heavier with each passing moment. When he hugged her one last time, it felt like her entire world stopped. She wanted to say so much, but the words got caught, suffocated by the fear of watching him go. All that remained was the silent promise that he would return. Marcos, however, didn't offer any definitive guarantees. He only mentioned letters, a commitment to keep their love alive through words. Helena desperately wanted to believe those promises, but a part of her heart knew the future was uncertain. The shadows of the military life he had chosen loomed between them like an invisible barrier. Even so, she clung to every word he said, creating a world where letters would be their only bridge. When the train finally pulled away, Helena felt empty, as if an essential part of herself had been taken. The pain of goodbye was raw, a sensation so deep it made it hard to breathe. The scenery around her seemed to lose its color, and the sounds of the station grew muffled and distant. She stood there, watching the train until it disappeared on the horizon, hoping that, somehow, he would return to her before becoming only a memory. In the following weeks, Helena lived in a kind of haze, anxiously waiting for the first letter. When it arrived, her heart filled with hope, as if every line was proof that their love still existed. Marcos's words were full of longing and promises, soothing her, even if only for a moment. With each letter that arrived, She allowed herself to believe more in the love they shared. Yet, the feeling of unease persisted. Helena knew that despite the letters, the distance was relentless. The fear that he would lose himself in a different world, far from her, haunted her. Every line she read was a mix of joy and uncertainty. She tried with all her strength to ignore the premonition that life might come between them, but deep down, she knew it was a battle only time would settle. And so she waited. She waited for the words that came on yellowed pages, for the letters that were the only bridge between their worlds now separated, holding her heart between hope and fear. In the beginning, the letters arrived with a frequency that filled the emptiness left by Marcos's departure. Helena waited eagerly for each envelope, her heart racing at the sight of her name written in his handwriting. Each letter was like a piece of the love they shared, an anchor that kept her connected to him. She lost herself in Marcos's words, feeling transported back to those sunlit summer days, where every promise seemed concrete and unbreakable. At first, the letters were long, filled with details about his new life and reflections on the time they had spent together. He described his routine, the challenges, and above all, the longing that tormented him. Every line pulsed with the intensity of someone loving from a distance, but Helena soon noticed that, as the months passed, the letters began to change. They became shorter, as if Marcos's time was being swallowed up by a life far removed from her. Each time a letter was delayed, a sense of anxiety took hold of Helena. She tried to find comfort in her memories, mentally reliving every detail of his face, every moment they had shared. The letters were all she had, and as the intervals between them grew longer, her fear intensified. It was as if the bond they cherished so much was beginning to unravel before her eyes, growing more fragile by the day. Eventually, the letters stopped. Helena spent days in anguished waiting, checking the mailbox and praying that the silence was only temporary. She refused to believe that he could simply disappear, that the love they had built that summer could dissolve like mist under the sun. But the weeks turned into months, and the void he left in her life seemed to deepen, filled with a bitterness she didn't know how to bear. Helena wondered what might have happened to Marcos, if he was all right, or if he had simply decided that the love they shared wasn't strong enough to survive the realities of his new life. That doubt gnawed at her. She had no answers, only an uncertainty that weighed on her chest. Her mind wandered through scenarios ranging from hope to complete despair, but she couldn't control the silence that now engulfed everything. Little by little, her pain transformed into a lasting melancholy, a shadow that followed her through each day, each memory. Helena carried on with her life, but always with the sense that something essential had been taken from her. That silence became a symbol of absence, of the loss of a love she felt was eternal but now seemed distant and unreachable. And so, Helena found herself trapped between past and present, trying to move forward without ever fully letting go of the memories she kept of Marcos. Each morning, she wondered if that emptiness would ever be filled again, or if the love she had felt would forever remain just a memory of a summer she could never relive. The decades drifted by like leaves carried by the wind, and Helena found herself ever more immersed in her career, and in building a life she had never imagined living alone. She had become a strong, independent woman, recognized for her work and admired by those around her. Yet behind each success, there was a quiet shadow that never left her. The memory of Marcos and the summer they had shared. It was a nostalgia that clung to her like a second skin, a dormant ache that resurfaced from time to time, reminding her of what she had lost. In moments of solitude, Helena allowed herself to relive those days, remembering Marcos's touch, the sound of his laughter, and the sweet words they exchanged. She kept his letters hidden in a box, like a forgotten treasure. Sometimes, on the loneliest nights, she would read them, searching for a spark of what their love had been and what it had meant to her. But as the years passed, she began to realize those words were merely ghosts of a past that could never return. Marcos, in turn, lived in a world Helena did not know. A world marked by discipline, sacrifice, and distance. His military career took him to far-off places, to missions that demanded his full attention, and to constant relocations that left little room for attachment. In his rare quiet moments, Marcos thought of her and what might have been. But he knew the choices he had made had taken him away from Helena, that fate had led them down separate paths, perhaps forever. Now, retired and with the traces of time etched on his face, Marcos reflected on the decisions that had distanced him from her. He had built a solid life, but it lacked the spark he had known by her side. Longing crept in like a cold breeze, reminding him of what he had left behind. He wondered what she was doing, if she had found happiness, if she still remembered the days they had spent together. Yet as much as he missed her, Marcos knew that their love had perhaps only been a memory to warm him on lonely nights. For Helena, life went on with the responsibilities and accomplishments she always valued. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't completely forget that love. In each victory, in each achievement, there was a sense of emptiness, as if something was missing. People around her admired her strength and determination, but Helena knew that beneath her successful facade was a woman who still secretly held onto a love that had never fully blossomed. The distance between them had become a constant presence, an invisible force shaping their lives in opposite directions. Both had adapted to what life demanded of them, but neither could entirely escape the past. The love they had shared, though dormant, was a flame that resisted, stubbornly, against the passage of time. Each day, Helena and Marcos carried the memories of that summer as fragments of an incomplete story. They had loved and lost, yet somehow fate seemed to whisper that their story was not yet over. And as time continued to move forward, what they didn't know was that their lives might cross paths once more, perhaps at a moment when words would no longer be necessary to revive what was written in their hearts. Decades later, retired and with a life built on a foundation of memories and accomplishments, Helena decided it was time to return to the place where it had all begun. The urge to relive the train journey, the same route that had taken her to the summer retreat, pulled her forward like an irresistible call. She wasn't sure what she expected to find or if the past awaited her in some way, but the desire to rekindle that lost moment was too strong to ignore. So on a cold, nostalgic morning, Helena boarded the train that would take her back to her memories. The train car seemed unchanged, as if frozen in time. The faintly aged scent of the seats, the monotonous sound of the wheels on the tracks, everything felt achingly familiar. Helena settled into a seat by the window, letting herself be lulled by the scenery that, though it may have changed, evoked in her mind an astonishing clarity about that distant summer. Each mile traveled felt like a journey into her own heart, where the memories she thought dormant now revealed themselves, alive and pulsing. Images of Marcos surfaced almost involuntarily, and she found herself reliving that first glance, the shared smiles, the subtle touch of their hands that still felt present. She wondered how he was now, if the lines of time had left their mark on him as they had on her. Yet, at the same time, she feared giving in to these fantasies, worried that the train was only a sanctuary for memories, a capsule that kept her locked in the past without offering any real hope for a reunion. As the train advanced, Helena felt a mixture of melancholy and hope. It was a contradictory feeling, but one that enveloped her completely. The landscape around her seemed to blur, becoming a wash of green and blue as her mind drifted between past and present. It was as if every turn on the tracks whispered a memory, and each station passed was a page turned in her own story. When the train made a brief stop at a small station, Helena felt a pang of anxiety, as if something important was about to happen. She looked out the window, observing the movement on the platform. People came and went, carrying bags, greeting each other. Her eyes roamed distractedly over the crowd until a figure caught her attention. For a moment, her heart stopped. A man with a firm stance and a contemplative gaze stood on the platform. Helena blinked, trying to focus. Her heart raced as she tried to process what she was seeing. The years and distance could deceive her, but that presence felt familiar. A blend of shock and emotion washed over her, and she realized that the possibility she had always considered remote was now in front of her. The man looked at the train with a slight smile, as if he knew something or someone awaited him. Helena felt her entire body tremble, each cell acutely aware of the moment she was experiencing. Was that figure real? Could she be trapped in a mirage? But deep down, her heart already knew the answer. And just as before, it was as if time had stopped, giving her once more the chance to relive a love she had never forgotten. Time seemed to have paused as Helena gazed at the man on the platform, a figure that brought back every memory she had held onto over the years. He was a bit different, with signs of age on his face and an air of experience only life could carve. But his eyes, those eyes that had captivated her decades ago, were unmistakable. The same intensity, the same warmth. Helena could barely breathe, feeling like a young woman once more, on the brink of reuniting with a love she had never let go of. Marcos lifted his gaze, and in that moment, he too seemed to feel the inexplicable magnetism that had once bound them. The years and distance between them melted away. Helena saw the slight smile that crossed his face, and something in her heart reignited. It was as if time had not passed, as if the flame she had kept burning in secret had finally found the breeze to reignite it. A whirlwind of emotions, joy and surprise, overtook her, leaving her nearly paralyzed. With slow, uncertain steps, Helena stepped off the train and walked toward Marcos, each step a mix of hesitation and courage. She felt his eyes following her every move, as if he too could not believe what was happening. The small station seemed cloaked in an ethereal atmosphere, the noises around them fading, leaving only the two of them, as if they were alone in the world. When they were face to face, Helena and Marcos simply looked at each other, absorbing each other's presence. She could see the same surprise and emotion in his eyes that she felt. He seemed to have aged well, yet his essence remained intact, like a preserved memory of who he had been. Helena noticed the lines on his hands, the weight of the years in his gaze, but also the spark that had once connected them. It was as if time had kept a promise, returning him to her once more. The emotion was overwhelming, a blend of joy and sadness that Helena didn't know how to express. Standing before Marcos again was like opening a door to the past while facing all they had never experienced. They were now different people, shaped by their experiences, but the love that had been interrupted felt only dormant, waiting for this moment. She felt vulnerable and exposed, as if every secret and desire were laid bare in the silence they shared. A brief smile crossed Marcos's face, and Helena felt the familiarity of that gesture, a warmth that comforted her heart. He stepped forward and the two embraced, a silent embrace that spoke of everything words could not express. It was a mixture of reunion and forgiveness, a mutual acceptance of all they had lost, and of what they might still find together. That moment represented years of longing and uncertainty, dissolving in the tenderness of the reunion. As they pulled apart, Helena knew fate had given her a second chance, a possibility she had never dared imagine. It was as if, after all this time, they were ready to face whatever was left of the love they had once shared. And there, under the open sky and the promise of a new beginning, she allowed herself to dream that perhaps, finally, they could find the path they had once left behind. The dinner in the train's dining car unfolded in a comfortable silence, with discreet smiles and glances that revealed as much as any words could. Helena felt a palpable tension, a mix of expectation and vulnerability, that took her back to the days when she had first met Marcos. Every gesture, every pause in their conversation, seemed heavy with meaning. Seated across from each other, it was as though they were both strangers and at the same time, old souls rediscovering one another. As the train continued its course, Marcos began to share his story, a story Helena had never fully heard. He spoke about his years in the military, the hard choices, and the distances that had not only taken him far from her but also from a life that might have been different. There were moments when he wanted to return, but something always stood in his way. With each revelation, Helena felt the image she had created of him over the years dissolve, giving way to a more complex and painful truth. Marcos explained that there had been promises he was never able to keep, not out of a lack of love, but because of the harsh reality life had imposed. Helena saw the weight he carried, the regret shadowing his gaze. The love between them had never been an illusion, but rather a casualty of circumstances and the choices they had each made. As she listened to his words, she felt a mix of understanding and sorrow, a sense that things could have been different, yet perhaps they never truly had a chance. As he spoke, Helena was overwhelmed by a wave of emotions. Anger, empathy, even gratitude. It was as though everything she had held inside for years was now surfacing. She understood that Marcos's absence had left a deep mark on her, but now, seeing the man he had become, she felt she could finally accept both the story they had lived and the one they hadn't. Sitting there facing him was not just a reunion with the past, but a chance to free herself from what once was. Marcos, on his side, seemed relieved to share everything he had kept inside. He confessed to the internal struggles, the sacrifices he had made, and the uncertainties he had faced over the years. Helena sensed the sincerity in each word, and what he left unsaid was even more apparent in his gaze. It was as if, by finally opening his heart, he handed her the weight of a love that had been interrupted but never forgotten. Hours passed, and the dinner turned into a moment of catharsis, where they both allowed themselves to feel and face the fragments of a past that still defined them. The train kept moving, but for Helena, it was as though she was finally finding what she had always sought. In that instant, the future felt less uncertain and more filled with possibilities, as if the past had, in some way, been a prelude to this meeting. As night deepened, Helena and Marcos realized words were no longer necessary. The silence between them became a pact, an acknowledgement of what they had lost and what they could still build. And for the first time, Helena felt that perhaps they were ready to begin again, free from the weight of the past and open to whatever fate still had in store. Night continued to fall, and Helena and Marcos stayed together, watching the scenery pass through the train windows like a reflection of the time they had left behind. Each stop, each curve seemed to echo the years they had spent apart, but also held the promise of something new. The conversation quieted, replaced by a calmness that only mutual understanding could bring. There they were, together, fully aware of the past and ready to face whatever lay ahead. At dawn, the train began to slow as they approached the final destination. Marcos took Helena's hand, a silent gesture that spoke louder than words. She looked at him, and in that moment, she knew something profound and lasting was forming. The journey they had traveled wasn't only about reunion. It was a rebirth, a second chance for a love that had always been theirs. The years they had spent apart could have extinguished the flame, but instead they had only strengthened it. The love Helena felt now was different. A love that acknowledged the flaws and imperfections, but that chose to stand strong. By Marcos's side, she felt it wasn't just a return to the past, but the beginning of a new future, one in which promises were no longer youthful illusions but a conscious decision to move forward. When the train finally stopped, Helena and Marcos stepped off together, walking toward a station that now symbolized the start of a new story. They didn't need words to know what they would do next. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with the certainty that, after all the years in separation, they were exactly where they needed to be. There was something magical and reassuring in knowing that, after everything, they still had each other. Helena took a deep breath, feeling the fresh morning air and the warmth of Marcos's hand in hers. It was a beginning simple, unassuming, yet deeply meaningful. She knew the road ahead might hold challenges, but she also understood that with him, she could face anything. The final destination didn't matter. What mattered was the journey they would share, step by step, as they had done during that first summer. Marcos looked at her with a quiet smile, and Helena felt complete, as if every piece of her life had finally fallen into place. The time they had spent apart no longer mattered. What truly counted was the future they still had before them. They were ready to create new memories, to live a love that was now mature, true, and as intense as what they had felt in their youth. Together, they walked toward the soft morning light, ready to explore the unknown with the courage only love can provide. They didn't need promises or guarantees, just the sincere desire to be together, to relive what they had lost and build something even more beautiful. And so, with the strength of a love that had endured time, Helena and Marcos embarked on a new chapter, certain that on life's tracks, they were finally where they had always belonged. Helena and Marcos remind us of how life can divert us from our plans and separate us from those we deeply love. Yet they also show us that true love can withstand time and overcome the difficult choices we make. Even when all seems lost, destiny can surprise us with a second chance. Patience, forgiveness, and the power of reunion can revive the love we thought had faded, proving that it's never too late to pursue happiness, and that sometimes, second chances are even more beautiful than the first. If you were touched by this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow more inspiring love stories like this one. Turn on notifications and share this video with friends and family. Who knows? This story might reach someone waiting for their own second chance at love. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next one.